to Doncic, and he fits that timeline pretty well, a little more than Harrison Barnes at this point.
Okay, so now we're going to go to the San Antonio Spurs, whose last year record is 47-35. Now, of course, San Antonio is my team. They've been my team for the past 20 years. So, of course, when I saw Vegas put them at 43.5, I will definitely bet the over. And I actually do think that this is one of the only overs that I'm like, oh, wow, I think it's going to be a good amount of games over than this. Just because last year, I believe the team that they're coming in with this year is just better than last year's team. And, you added a third-team All-NBA guy, and you didn't actually lose that much because Kawhi Leonard didn't play last year. So I believe by adding him and adding some depth for center in Jacob Poeltl or maybe a starter, depending on how the season works, I do think that the Spurs are going to be a better team. They're going to have another year of DeJounte Murray. I think the loss of Tony Parker, at least on the game time, the in-game, actually does improve them because Tony Parker was a negative last year. From what I watched, he barely played any defense. He just wasn't the same Tony Parker we've known in the past. And I do believe that's part of the reason why the Spurs let him go this year. I think, letting Derek White play and just bringing back Marco Bellinelli, I do believe the Spurs are going to be a better team. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, but we got to remember now, they did lose Kyle Anderson, Danny Green, Manu Ginobili, and these guys were still productive players for the San Antonio Spurs. So I have their win-loss at 45, so I am betting the over. I'm pretty actually surprised. 43.5 is a pretty low number for the Spurs. I mean, I thought putting them at 45 was a little low, but I could see this being a team that declines from last year. So I understand that, but I don't see them declining to 43, 44 wins. I see them a little higher than that. Again, I have them set at 45. So I'm betting the over as pretty surprised here, as considering I thought they'd be at about 47, 48 at the win over-under. So, yeah, again, the Spurs are going to be an interesting team, though it depends. I mean, we'll see what we get out of LaMarcus Aldridge, Pau Gasol. These are two players that are going to be important. If we get the same LaMarcus Aldridge we got last year, it'll be nice. If Pau Gasol doesn't decline too much, I mean, obviously he's in for some type of decline. He is about 37, 38 at this point, but if he continues to play as consistent as he has been, they'll be a solid team. If DeJounte Murray could continue to develop the way he has, they'll be a very solid team. It's just, we'll have to see. The Spurs will be an interesting team to keep an eye out on.
I think the player here to break out the most, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, almost every article I've read for players who are poised to break up next year, I usually hear that DeJounte Murray, and I think that's an obvious choice for a few reasons. I know he made the All-NBA second defensive team last year, but he only really did play 20 minutes a game, which is not going to be the case this year. I do believe his minutes are going to go up at least to the 26-minute range. Obviously, one area that he really needs, there's probably two areas he really needs to improve on. But first, I think he has to improve on his shooting, which, he's, as every NBA player, he's been working on his shooting over the summer, so we'll see where that is. The other area where he needs to improve on is, his assists and his team management. This is not something that's been a strong suit of this game. But other than that, he is one of the better, if not statistically, at least defensive rankings. I believe had him as the top-rated point guard defender. He might have been second behind Chris Paul. I could be wrong on that. But he was either one or two, and he's one of the best rebounding guards in the league, too. So there's things that he's really good at. If he can improve a little bit in the other areas, then he will be a really good, solid NBA point guard.
Yeah, with DeJounte Murray, I could see him more improving at what he's already good at. I don't see him improving much of his shot. I mean, I think at this point, obviously, he's going to improve some. I just don't ever see him even being considered a good shooter. I could see him improving more at what he's good at, really knowing his role. This is the type of player who I don't think will ever be a superstar, will be about a fourth, fifth best player on the team. And I think he'll play that role just fine and accept it just okay. So we'll see how that goes with him. So before announcing the trade here for the San Antonio Spurs, I like to make a bold prediction, and if it comes true, you heard it here first. Jimmy Butler will end up as a San Antonio Spur. I could see them being that dark horse team, just like Boston was last year with Kyrie and Toronto was this year with Kawhi Leonard, that really goes out and acquires Jimmy Butler, gives up some of their young players, gives up a player like Pau Gasol and maybe a first-round pick for Jimmy Butler, and Minnesota takes that deal because of the fact that even though they are conference rivals, they're not division rivals. And most of the teams that Jimmy Butler would fit really well on are the teams that are division rivals. So, but I did not want to propose that as a trade just because it is pretty far-fetched. So the trade I am going to make now, taking into consideration here that San Antonio Spurs might not be able to sign him next year in free agency just because they probably won't have enough money to make it happen. I am going to propose a Rudy Gay, Lonnie Walker, and Bryn Forbes, and maybe a first-round pick for Tobias Harris. How do you feel about that?
I don't know why the Clippers would do a deal, just maybe because they can't. They don't see themselves resigning. Yeah, I mean, Bryn Forbes, Lonnie Walker, obviously those are two players with some potential. I mean, Bryn Forbes is a little bit older. He was a 4-year player at Michigan State. I think he already spent 2 years in the NBA, so he's a little bit older. Obviously, we don't know where the ceiling is for Lonnie Walker or what kind of a player he's going to become. But, I mean, if you're the Spurs to pass on a young player like Tobias Harris, who's better than all the players you mentioned, at least right now, it would really help them out. So if you're the Spurs, I do think you would go for that deal, and then you could also, that way you would acquire his bird rights, so you would be able to re-sign him, right?
Yeah, correct. And I think exactly the point you brought up, I think, is perfect here. I think I could really see, I see a higher chance than not that Tobias Harris does get traded mid-season. More for the fact that, yes, he's going to demand a lot of money next offseason, and rightfully so. He's a modern-day NBA player. He's similar to an Otto Porter. Probably won't get paid as much as Otto Porter just because Otto Porter was a little younger when he got paid that much. But he will get paid somewhere in the $20 to $25 million range. And I think as the season continues to go on and the Clippers continue to see their chances of acquiring at least one superstar and probably two superstars go up, they're going to realize that losing Tobias Harris for nothing does not make sense to them. And it makes sense to go out and acquire a player like Lonnie Walker on a rookie scale contract for 4 more years. Another first-round pick in this situation. Obviously, Rudy Gay is an expiring deal. Bryn Forbes is still fairly young and a solid rotation player who doesn't cost a lot of money. And I think that's the type of deal that's going to make sense for the LA Clippers. And we have to remember that Tobias Harris will be on an expiring contract. And there won't be teams willing to give up an arm and a leg to go get him, and probably wouldn't even if he wasn't an expiring contract, just because he's not a superstar, and he probably never will be a superstar. He's a very solid third option on a good team.
All right, I just want to respond also to your Jimmy Butler take. I've thought about this. Obviously, adding Jimmy Butler to this year's team for me would be a nice thing. I mean, I think Jimmy Butler is obviously from Texas. He grew up in Houston, so bringing him close to home would probably be a good idea. I just thinking about it, I don't know what young players Minnesota would want in this deal. Obviously, DeJounte Murray is the only one that can maybe be enticed, but even he hasn't shown enough, in my opinion, to be traded in a Jimmy Butler deal.
I think Lonnie Walker, Jakob Poeltl, a first-round pick, and Pau Gasol. I mean, we have to remember that Jimmy Butler is not going to net the Minnesota Timberwolves as much as they are hoping to get. Probably
That's
nothing.
A lot of young players the Spurs would be giving up.
That is, but they're keeping DeJounte Murray in this deal. I mean, they're giving up
Jakob Poeltl.
Jakob Poeltl, Lonnie Walker, and a first-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, if Minnesota wants, obviously it's not Ben Simmons what they asked for from Philadelphia, so.
I don't think they didn't believe they were going to get that. That's just Tom Thibodeau being a Tom Thibodeau, a jackass. Really.
The Spurs asked for him too, and Kawhi's definitely in a better position, at least. And Philly wouldn't give up Ben Simmons for that. But yeah, I mean, if that's the deal, then if that's the deal on the table, and you're the Spurs general manager, then yeah, you take it just because you do have that'll put you with 3 All-Stars and still some key players that would be able to fill out your roster, and you'd be able to be successful. And like everyone said, Pop only has a few more years left. This would be a good way for him to kind of see how good he is and then his style. And it would also take away, my prediction is going to be that Houston Rockets are going to end up with Jimmy Butler just because they
Wow,
are
that's
very
bold.
aggressive.
They have nothing on that, Rob. I mean, they have decent players, but see, I think
But if Tom Thibodeau wants to win, you can get an Eric Gordon.
which I think would be very extremely stupid of the Rockets to do. Eric Gordon is what makes that team, and so is PJ Tucker at this point. And you're right. I mean, I could see that happening. I don't see that happening, but I could.
But I don't think you can say that adding Jimmy Butler, obviously Jimmy Butler and Eric Gordon is good. I think adding Eric Gordon or Jimmy Butler is a better player.
I mean, Jimmy Butler is a better player. I'm not saying that, but I think Eric Gordon fits that team better. Not to mention losing a player like PJ Tucker alongside Eric Gordon would be pretty. I think it would be pretty catastrophic for the Houston Rockets. Now, I know I may be overstating it a little bit, but at that point, you're losing depth on a team that lost a lot of depth this summer. I mean, you got to remember, they lost Ariza, Bahamute, Joe Johnson, and Ryan Anderson. And these were all players who played a decent amount of minutes for a team now that's severely lacking some depth.
Yeah, and obviously there's all the question of what would adding Jimmy Butler to the team, like what would it do to it? What would be the culture in the locker room? It'd be I do think adding Jimmy Butler would be at least a very, very interesting season and one fun to watch because it can go really well and they somehow match together. Or it can go poorly and the season is a disaster, especially already with Carmelo Anthony on the team.
Yeah, I could see it being disastrous. I think the other team that makes sense besides San Antonio, I think San Antonio and Toronto are the two teams that really make sense. Because the three teams, I mean, and Miami too, but I don't know what Miami has that Minnesota.
I will agree that
want.
Toronto was my one thing that I think, especially since Masai already took a gamble on Kawhi, so why not take another one and see where it really ends up? Okay, so let's move on to the New Orleans Pelicans, whose record last year's were 48-34. The addition they made this year was Julius Randle. They lost Rajon Rondo and, of course, DeMarcus Cousins, who didn't actually compete at all. The Vegas has them projected at 45.5 wins, so a few less wins than last year. I struggled with this pick because I do believe they are about the 46-45 win range. So if I had to bet, I would actually bet the under just because Anthony Davis has had a little bit of injury history, and if he goes down, everything goes down. Even if he's out for 12 games, that can really sway this. So I would bet the under, but again, I do believe that the New Orleans Pelicans are at around the 45-46 win range.
Yeah, it's low to me. I have them at 49 wins. I think the fact that they really took off and played so well once DeMarcus Cousins went down. Now, granted, yeah, it was partially because of Rajon Rondo being there too, but at the same time, I don't think losing him this upcoming season will hurt them as much. So I think they're going to really take off at one point and be like the Philadelphia 76ers did last year where they kind of won, what was it? How many games did they win in a row?
17 or 16?
17 or 16. I could see them being that team that just goes off at one point on like a 14, 15 game winning streak that really boosts their win-loss record. Because of the fact that I'm a big fan of Julius Randle. I think he fits in there well. I think obviously Anthony Davis has taken another step up. Each one more is a very solid rotational player, very solid starter at shooting guard. They are getting Solomon Hill back. We'll see how he plays. Obviously, and Alfred Payton is going to matter here too. I'm not saying he's going to be good, but he is going to matter because he will probably be playing point guard right next to Drew Holiday. And if that doesn't happen, now Drew Holiday has to slide back to the point guard, and you're losing some depth there. So that will be interesting to see how that develops, but I could really see them being that team that just goes on like a 14, 15 game winning streak when everything matches very well.
I don't know if I agree with you there for a few variety of reasons, just because there's a lot of real good teams in the West, and to pull out 14 or 15 games in a row in the West is very difficult. I think Philly, last year when they did so, they were playing in the East, they were playing really bad teams, and as we talked about, I think we talked about Memphis, you had them at the under, but there's a chance where Memphis is a good team next year, and just a game against them is just going to be a tough game. Again, I do think Rondo had a lot to do with it. I do think, at least in the playoff performance, one of the things that was good about them for them was the matchup. That their guards were just able to guard the two best players on Philly. That was their strength. Their strength is, there was their guard defense. And that's not necessarily going to be the thing. I definitely disagree with you. I do think that